has indeed been extraordinary. It has been extraordinary because we have been joined by the Secretary of State of the US, Antony Blinken, by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, by UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, and the Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly. Also, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba connected with the Council remotely, because he is in Ukraine, obviously, to give an overview of the latest development on the ground and the urgent needs of Ukrainians and the atrocities committed by Russian forces who continue bombing indiscriminately several Ukrainian cities. First, the humanitarian situation. The humanitarian situation on the ground is becoming more and more difficult due to this continuous bombing of the Russian army. They are shelling residential housing, schools, hospitals, and other civilian infrastructures. It looked like they want to destroy Ukraine. The Human Rights Council, aware of that, has today voted on the urgent establishment of a commission of inquiry to address these violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. Take into account that right now the figure of the number of people who are escaping Ukraine and crossing the borders of the European Union and also other countries like Moldova is today more than 1 million people and increasing very quickly. More will come. More will come. We are above 1 million in less than a week. That we strongly call for a humanitarian corridor. The International Red Cross is not able to enter the country, and we need green corridors for the Red Cross to be able to help the Ukrainian people. People, children, mothers, fathers, needs food, needs basic items. I saw yesterday myself in my visit to Moldova, where I visited the refugee reception center. I've seen many of them around the world, but it's heartbreaking. You never get used to these kind of things. Putin must allow humanitarian aid to go into Ukraine. Secondly, the European Union is committed to provide access to everyone fleeing the war in Ukraine, and hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have already arrived in the EU, and they are going to several member states from the borders into the European Union. And member states highlighted the need to further support the frontline members and asked the Commission to look into this and to mobilize resources from the budget of the European Union and from the Commission services. More dangerous than that, overnight we saw the Russian attack in the direct vicinity of the Ukrainians' nuclear power plant. The biggest Ukrainian nuclear power plant has been attacked, and this is certainly unacceptable because it can produce catastrophic consequences that can provoke an ecological and humanitarian catastrophe for the entire Europe. We have to respect, the Russian army have to respect emergency safe zones around nuclear sites, and we need to establish, to ensure the safety of these zones, because the safety of the entire European continent can be affected. But the most important and pressing question, the most important and pressing request is to Russia cease its military operations and withdraw from the territory of Ukraine. And the same goes for Belarus, who is a full accomplice to Moscow. We have been discussing with Secretary Blinken, and Tony Blinken said, we are seeing a historic moment of the cooperation between the European Union and the US, and the reinforcement of the Euro-Atlantic Partnership. Together, we led the way for imposing the most far-reaching sanctions package ever adopted, and we must now ensure that they are fully implemented, because it's not enough to announce, to agree and to announce, but they have to be implemented, loopholes have to be closed, and hope that they will undermine the Russian war machine. President Putin intended to divide us, but he achieved just the contrary. We are more united and more determined than ever, much more than before the Russian aggression, and Russia is completely isolated on the international community, as the vote on the General Assembly clearly showed yesterday. This vote left not room for doubt. The world stands with Ukraine. The world stands on the right side of history, and this vote sent a clear signal. And today, the Human Rights Council vote again and establish it again an independent commission of inquiry into the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. And also the result was very clear: 32 votes in favor, 2 against, 3 abstentions. I want to stress the importance that our sanctions are targeted, they are already producing results, and that the aim is not to harm the Russian people, but to pull the rug out from under the Kremlin's war machine. It is, however, unfortunately, as a fact, that it will also affect people who are not in the inner circle of the Kremlin, and until a certain point, ordinary people will also suffer the consequences of Putin's war, because let's call it the way it has to be called. That's Putin's war, and only Putin can end it. We have to avoid the Russian oligarchs to escape from the effects of sanctions and to clamp down on tax evasion. This is a good occasion to fight against the oligarchy and to fight against tax evasion, because both things go together. We have to locate them and to seize their assets, because the Russian regime dwells their wealth from corruption and tax evasion. We need to combat this and turn off the tap of money flows financing this senseless war. And in order to stop the flows of money who finance the Russian army and the Russian war, today we have also discussed the need to accelerate the green energy transition to further reduce our energy dependency from Russia. Allow me to say something about my visit to Moldova, together with Commissioner Borrell. Both of us, we underscored the solidarity of the European Union with Moldova, conveyed our gratitude and appreciation for the people of Moldova, their efforts and solidarity in welcoming refugees in a large number. Moldova is not the richest country in Europe, and it has been receiving such a big number of refugees that in proportion to its population is like Spain would have received more than 1 million refugees. The situation in Moldova is fragile, and they need urgent support, and we will provide it. Finally, allow me to underline a very clear political assessment. This is not the East against the West. This is not a remake of the Cold War. We are defending the sovereignty of the nations, all nations. We are defending the territorial integrity of states, all states, on the East, on the West, on the North, and the South. It's not again the battle of two hemispheres. We are defending international law, sovereignty of states, territorial integrity, not violation of the borders, is something that is valuable for anyone in the world. We are not enemies of the Russian people. We are friends of Ukraine. We are supporting them on their fight, but we are not against the Russian people. That's Putin's war, and only Putin can end it.
Thank you very much. I will start by taking a few questions on the here, and I have first Thomas. You had.
Yeah, good evening, Thomas Kutschka with Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Hi, Representative, while you were talking, a G7 declaration has been issued that announces further severe sanctions against Russia and potentially also Belarus. Since we haven't had a sanctions package for 2 days now, could you please walk us a little bit through the reasoning behind it, the aims of this package, and size and scope? Thanks a lot.
I understand that for the news, the important thing is the new package of sanctions. For me, at that moment, the important thing is to implement the yesterday package. Huh?
But it has been announced.
Yes, it has been announced, the will of continue advancing on the sanctions. And we, too, have been considering here which new package of sanctions can be decided in the coming days. For example, we can enlarge the number of banks, Russian banks, to be switch off of SWIFT, but we haven't taken any specific decision about such bank or another. We have sent to the technical bodies the proposal to study more banks, and let's see. We can increase the amount of banks. We can go deeper on the financial sanctions, but please, stop one moment and think about the consequences of what we have already decided. Today, the last news is that Russia has made default on a certain number of debt nominated in rubles and not paying the coupon, the interest of this debt to the foreign investors by an amount of 29 billion euros or dollars. I don't know which the figure was related to euros or dollars. This is an important consequence. Immediately, in less than 3 days, 4 days, this decision of blocking the reserve of the Russian bank and the central bank of the G7, it will be full of consequences. So yes, it will be more sanctions, and they are being studied. Today we haven't taken any decision, but the important thing is to implement what we have decided. I understand that once we announce something, people forget about it. No, I'm not forgetting about it. When I'm saying I will look for the wealth of the oligarchs, this is something that has to be done, has to be followed, has to be implemented, country by country, city by city, and it has to be converted on practical consequences of our decisions. Otherwise, it's wet words. And believe me, it will not be wet words.
Thanks. Now I'm going to go to the colleagues who are connected remotely. And Lawrence, you have the floor.
Thanks a lot. Calling in from Vienna. Hi, Rep, 2 questions, if I may. The sanctions that are now in place, is the goal of those sanctions now to end simply the war, or is the goal of the sanctions to provoke a change of regime in Russia, and will they remain in place as long as Putin remains in the Kremlin? And my second question is on what's going on around me here. Everyone has said we're very close to a deal on the Iranian nuclear agreement. So who or what is standing in the way of finishing it? Thank you.
It's Lawrence. You could not avoid it.
I understand. Lawrence, look, we are not under regime change. The sanctions are not in order to provoke a regime change in Russia. By the contrary, the sanctions has been triggered by the war. And the purpose is to weaken the Russian economy, to make the Russian economy feel the weight of the consequences, and to strengthen the position of the Ukrainians on the coming negotiations. but nothing about regime change. That's not the issue. I'm saying that's Putin war because it's not the war of the Russian people. It's the war of the Putin's regime. But we are not entering on this issue. And secondly, half of my brain is devoted to the Iranian, half of my brain and half of my time, well, not half of my time, maybe less than half of my time, is devoted to the Iranian deal, to try to revive the Iranian deal. Things are going on. I hope that during this weekend we can deliver. I hope.
Okay, and you have the floor.
I haven't said that we will get results during the weekend. I said we hope. I hope. I strongly hope.
Thank you very much. I'm Lily from Politico. A lot of Ukrainians are feeling quite disappointed right now by the decision not to establish a no-fly zone in Ukraine. What is your message to the Ukrainian population that, and those people on the ground who may be feeling abandoned right now by this decision? Thank you.
It's not to the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union to take these kind of decisions. It's a matter of NATO. You know, when you decide that there is a non-flying zone, it means that you are ready to make this a reality using force, sending flights to shut down everyone who violates this non-flying zone. This is something that the European Union Foreign Affairs Council could not decide, certainly.
Thanks. Aurélie, you have the floor.
Bonsoir, Aurélie Punier.
Good evening, I'm here for Brussels 2. I'll ask a question in French. The Commission discussed a compensation mechanism for the member states affected most by the sanctions. I wonder if this topic was brought up, discussed, or where we might be with implementation. The Commissioner, no, it wasn't discussed. In fact, nobody even asked the question at this stage.
From remotely.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner, you said the sanctions, the aim of the sanctions is to weaken Russia. But this, of course, takes time. What if in the meantime Putin doesn't stop? What's the plan B? I mean, to avoid the war. I mean, he attacked a power plant, as you said, a nuclear power plant with terrible risks for everybody. Is there a plan B for, I don't know, negotiation or asking Zelensky to leave Kiev, maybe? Not in sign of a surrender, but just to avoid war and wait for Russia to collapse, basically, because this will take time, it will take years. Thanks.
No, we are not going to ask Zelensky to surrender. On ne va pas demander à Zelensky de quitter Kiev. On ne va pas demander à Zelensky.
We're not going to ask Zelensky to leave Kiev. We're not going to ask him to stop fighting. We can do many things, but if people are expecting financial sanctions to stop the war overnight, they don't know what they're talking about. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to stop the war in its tracks. What we can do, however, is weaken the Russian economy significantly over time. The Human Rights Council can't stop the war either, but it can send in inquiry teams to establish and witness the violations of human rights, and that is something that, when the report is drawn up, will further weaken Russia in the face of the international community. The United Nations can't stop the war either. Unfortunately, sadly, it doesn't have a voting mechanism which by majority vote of the General Assembly can put an end to the war. I wish the international community were that powerful, but it's not. But all of these steps weaken Russia. They lead to increased international isolation, financial, economic weakness, and all of that has consequences, but it will take some time. We're taking these steps because they're the steps that we can take. Philippe.
Merci, Philippe Renier, Journal Le Soir.
Le Soir newspaper. Since we are talking about weakening Russia and improving the chances for Ukraine to have a better position in future negotiations, did you discuss the issue of speeding up the green transition, which is very laudable, but which would no doubt take quite a long time as compared to sanctions? So the question of reducing purchases today or tomorrow of hydrocarbons from Russia, is that something which was discussed around the table? And in terms of new sanctions, closing ports to Russian shipping, has that been discussed, or will it be discussed in the near future? We understand your message that, first of all, one has to implement what has already been decided. Well, we had what one might call a brainstorming in terms of imposing even harsher sanctions. Some of the points you mentioned were put on the table by certain countries, but we haven't had a decision. I can't present in detail discussions that didn't lead to a result. The energy transition needs to be speeded up, not just for climatic reasons, but also for geopolitical reasons. We see that there are a number of measures which can be taken to reduce the EU's dependence on gas. We can't do it overnight, but it needs to be, we need to start reducing it as of now, putting into effect all the available tools we have. That is the Council's, that is the political commitment that the Council discussed, but don't expect any immediate decisions. Russian gas represents 40% of our gas imports in the European Union, where you can't simply put an end to all that overnight. We can reduce it, and we can reduce it relatively quickly, and that's what we're going to try to do. That is not just what we're going to try to do, but what we're going to do in actual fact.
And here.
Thanks very much, Nick from The Sun. You mentioned at the start that you discussed the shelling on the nuclear power plants and that it could cause a catastrophe for the whole of Europe. I wonder, in that scenario, would you consider that to be an attack on the EU and therefore also an attack on NATO by association? And what would you expect the response to that kind of scenario to be? Thanks.
C'est une attaque contre l'Ukraine.
Well, it's an attack against Ukraine, and indeed the implications could affect the whole European Union, but the attack is on Ukraine.
Encore une question ou
One other question, or, well...
This is our last, our press conference today, and thank you very much for your patience, and see you probably next week.